Hello, and today's learning target is I can order numbers from least to greatest in varying forms. Let's take a look at the first example. So here I see the square root of 64, the square root of 40, 6, the square root of 50, and 7. So again, I need to order these from least to greatest. So let's figure out some of the square roots that we can. The square root of 64 is 8. So far I know I have 8, 6, and 7. Now, let's think of where the square root of 40 would end up being. Well, or what it would end up to be. Well, the square root of 40 is between which two perfect squares? The square root of 36, which would be 6, and the square root of 49, which would be 7. And so this square root of 40 is definitely a little bit, it's bigger than 36, so it's going to be over 6. So we know that it for sure is going to be larger than the 6. So the 6 will be smaller than the square root of 40, right? Because the square root of 40 will be 6 point something. We don't know exactly what it will be with our decimal, but it will have a decimal. We don't have to necessarily check that. You can on your calculator if you would like, but we don't even really have to know exactly what it is. We know it's slightly larger than 6. And then the square root of 50, well, the square root of 50 here is between which two perfect squares? Well, square root of 49, which would be 7, and then the square root of, excuse me, 64, which would be 8. So 50 is close to the square root of 49, which is just roughly over, a little bit over 7. So we know that this number will be a little bit larger than the 7. So our lowest number here is 6. And then the square root of 40 is slightly over 6. It's going to be 6 point something. So that's the square root of 40 would come second. And then we have 7. And then the square root of 50 would be right after it. And then the square root of 64, which we know would be 8, would be last. And that would be the largest or the greatest number here. Let's look at the second example. The square root of 16, 3.9, 41 over 10, and 4.01. Well, we know the square root of 16 is really 4, so that's slightly larger than 3.9. 41 over 10. Well, 10 goes into 41 how many times? If we change this to a mixed number, to a fraction. Well, 10 goes into 41 4 times, and there's 1 left over, and then 10 would be the remainder. And 1 over 10 as a decimal would be, it's 0.1, because if you add up 10.1s, that equals to 1.0, which would be 1 whole. So this is 4.10, which then would be a little bit bigger than the 4.01. So let's look at numbering these. We know 3.9, or from least to greatest, is the smallest. Then we know right after that comes 4. And then right after the 4 comes 4.01, and then after that would be 41 over 10. And I should probably erase this 4 here and put the square root of 16 because that's what was given to us in the original question. And I can erase this little line right here. And then that would be our answer. Let's continue to the next example. I see 6, the square root of 32, 8 over 2, 5, and the square root of 20. So let's look at breaking some of these numbers down. Square root of 32 is between the square root of 25 and the square root of 36. So it's between 5 and 6, right? Because the square root of 25 is 5 and the square root of 36 is 6. And 32 is a little bit closer to 36. So it's going to be, at least 5.5, 5.6, maybe even 5.7. So we know that's above 5. So this number will be larger than that one right there, 5. 8 over 2 can simplify to be 4. And then the square root of 20 is between the square root of 16 and the square root of 25. And it's kind of right in the middle with being a little bit closer to 16. So we know that that's going to be 4 point something. So if we start to order these, 8 over 2 is the least. And then I see that, square root of 20, which is slightly over 4, would come next. And then 5. And then lastly, we said the square root of 32 would be 5 point something, which would be greater than 5. So this would be the order from least to greatest. Let's take a look at a few more examples. Okay, so I see 4, negative square root of 2, negative 2, negative 6 over 2, 0, and the square root of 15. So let's look here. We see 4, negative square root of 2, negative 2, and then negative 6 over 2 would be 3, and that's a negative. 0, and then square root of 15 is going to be between what? 9 and 16. So therefore, that's going to be closer to the square root of 16, which is 4. So that's 3 point something. So this first number here, 4, will actually be the largest. If we work our way backwards, then the square root of 15, because that would be 3 point something. And now let's look at these other numbers here. Well, negative square root of 2, and I kind of glanced over that. That's between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4, and it's actually closer to the 1. So that's going to be 1 point something, right? And that's what's going to be negative 1 point something. So the least number is actually going to be the negative 3. And then would be the negative 2. And then I'm going to need to have some more room here. Negative 2, and then it's going to be negative square root of 2. And I need to get some more room here, and then would come 0, and then would come the square root of 15, and then 4. So how many numbers is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we are correct, and that would be least to greatest. Let's look at the next example. Okay, so now we see some absolute values. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Then I see negative 5. 3 squared is 9. Negative 5.1, positive 5.1, and square root of 10. The square root of 10 is between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. So it's between 3 and 4. So it's slightly over 3 because 10 is a little bit larger than 9. So if I go from least to greatest, the least number will be the negative 5.1, followed by the negative 5. And then, so those two, I can actually cross them out. That'd be even easier, so I know which numbers I've used. And then would come and this is square root of 10, which would be 3 point something, so that one comes next. And then the 5. Oops, I should be putting these in the other way, right? I should be saying the absolute value of negative 5, right? That should come next. I should keep them the way they're listed. And then 5.1, and then 3 squared. And that would cover all the numbers, and I am correct. That's least to greatest. Okay, let's take a look at the last example here. So I have negative 18 over 9, which is negative 2. And then negative square root of 2, which we said on the last example was about 1 point something, right? So this is negative 1 point something. Okay, 1 point and then number follows it. Negative 3, negative 1, negative 2.5. So the least number out of all these would be the negative 3, followed by the negative 2.5, followed by this negative 2 here, which is really negative 18 over 9. And then the negative 1 point something, so that's the negative square roots of 2, and then negative 1. And that would be listed from least to greatest. Thanks for listening. Again, with ordering numbers from least to greatest, always remember just to estimate some of the numbers. If you do want to check them with the calculator, you always can. But be mindful of the signs. Some may be negative, some may be positive, and then it's always good to double check your work to go back through and make sure that you do have them in least to greatest order. Have a great day. Bye-bye.